Uh, Hello, everybody. Welcome to University of Central Asia's Culture, Heritage, Humanities Unit online public lecture. First of all, I would like to apologize about the technical issue that are happening. We cannot hear the speaker's sound from somehow from his computer. So he will share his PowerPoint presentation with me, and I will share, and he will speak from his phone. Sorry about that. And my name is Choshanbe Nazarov, a research fellow at Cultural Heritage and Humanities Unit of Graduate School of Development and assistant professor at School of Arts and Sciences. Now it's our honor and privilege to have Dr. Abdulmamad Iloliev with us today, who is going to deliver a lecture on a very interesting topic entitled Between the Pamirs and the Hindukush, Ancient Wakhan at the Crossroad of History. Dr. Abdulmamad Iloliev is a research associate in the Department of Curriculum Studies at the Institute of Ismaili Studies in London and a faculty member at the Institute's graduate program in Islamic Studies and Humanities and the secondary teacher education program. He also translates and edits the IAS primary and secondary curriculum on Islam in Tajik, Russian, and Persian languages. He had previously held a number of research and teaching posts in Tajikistan, Canada, and the UK, including research fellowships at the University of London Schools of Oriental and African Studies and the University of Sussex School of Global Studies. He has a BA with distinction in history from the Dushanbe State Pedagogical University, an MPhil and PhD from the University of Cambridge in Middle Eastern and Islamic Studies. His primary research interests focus on Central Asian studies, Islamic mysticism, history, and literature. Dr. Iloliev is the author of 3 monographs, The Ismaili Sufi Sage of Pamir, Mubarak Wakhani and the Esoteric Tradition of the Pamir Muslims, published in 2008 in English language, Mubarak Wakhani, Context, Life and Thought in 2019 in Tajik language, and the Ismailis of Pamir, Legends, Beliefs, and History in Turkish language in 2020. He also translated several articles and had several peer-reviewed articles and book chapters. Now, without further delay, let's welcome our speaker, Dr. Abdulmamad Iloliev. Dr. Iloliev, the floor is yours. I'm going to share now the PowerPoint presentation.
First of all, I'd like to thank Dr. Choshanbe Nazarov for the invitation, as well as for the kind introduction. I'm delighted to present as a part of the public lecture series organized by the University of Central Asia's Cultural Heritage and Humanities project. And I also want to thank everyone who showed interest in joining this, this lecture today. So here I would like to talk about the ancient Wakhan, its historical sites and traditional legends associated with them among the local population of Wakhan. Examining the ancient Wakhan route, I am aiming to make a broader argument concerning the role and significance of the ancient Wakhan in the international trade of cultural exchanges and the trade which was known as Silk Road, the famous one, which was connecting China, India, and Central Eurasia in the past. The expansion of the trade and military campaign led to the construction of massive strongholds alongside the upper Panj-River and Wakhan-Darya in the Pamirs. In order to facilitate the traffic of people and goods on the road, these strongholds were built by some imperial powers, like, for example, the Kushan, which I'm going to talk about. George, if you could go to the second slide, please. Before moving into the main point of our discussion, I think it's worth giving a brief geographic description of the region for the benefit of those who are not so familiar with it. Well, Wakhan, also called CHHU in ancient Iranian term, it means river country. So it is located along the river Wakhan-Darya, also called Wakhan, and the river Panj in the heart of the Pamirs and the Hindukush mountains. It also includes the Great Kalan or the Little Pamirs, which are also known as Doa or Past and Upper Uch Pamirs in Wakhi language. Some studies, for example, Russian scholars Pakhalina and Steblin-Kaminsky also indicate that the term Wakhan was originally applied to a wider geographic area stretched from miles along the shores of the Pamir, Wakhan, and Panj rivers up to the confluence of the latter with the river Khingob or Obi Khingob, which flows through a rift valley called Wakhia in the margins of modern Darwas. Presently, Wakhan comprises of two separate subnational entities within the Gorno-Badakhshan Autonomous Oblast of Tajikistan, which is called Ishkashim District or Nohia, and the Badakhshan province of Afghanistan, which is called the Wakhan Uluswali, respectively. As you can see from this map, Wakhan is a natural corridor well equipped with water resources, and also rich in minerals and safe travel routes. I mean, it was probably the combination of these factors which made many travelers, especially the merchants and the monks in the ancient times, to decide to travel along the route, the Wakhan route, of course, to China, India, or Bactria, and vice versa. There are ruins of numerous ancient fortresses, temples, arrow towers, caravansaries, and settlements in Wakhan, which serve to facilitate the smooth transit of goods and people on the road. In fact, more than 20 ancient sites have been discovered so far in Wakhan since the beginning of the first archaeological excavations in the 1950s, and thanks to the Soviet scholars. So here I just want to concentrate on the four main sites, which are the fortresses of Namadgut and Yamchun and the Buddhist temple of Prang and Khandut, to see how important these sites were in the life of the Silk Road and to what extent trade and cultural exchanges contributed towards the evolution of the local economies and cultures. As far as just to talk a little bit about the sources, one must confess that the ancient history of Wakhan is not well documented, but there are still some important geographic and geological references found in the early Chinese and Arabic sources. The Chinese were probably the first and the earliest explorers who, from as early as the 1st century BC to the 8th century AD, constantly traveled through Wakhan to South and Central Asia in different purposes, like pursuing certain diplomatic, trade, and religious goals. Some of these travelers collected significant information about the geography, climate, people, rulers, religious beliefs, and cultures of these regions, including those of Wakhan. The account here, of course, we have to mention the accounts of the Buddhist monk travelers like Chinese Hain Tsang, also called Huanzang, Korean Hu Chao, who give some information about the Wakhan's Buddhist past and its early encounters with Islam. Now, with the Arabic invasion, which started in the late 7th and early 7th century AD, and subsequent expansion of Islam in Central Asia, our knowledge of Wakhan, and though still fragmented and small, is enriched by Muslim sources such as Al-Yaqubi, Ibn Khordadbeh, Ibn Rusta, Al-Istarhi, Al-Biruni, and of course the famous 10th century Persian book of geography, Hudud al-A'lam, the boundaries of the world. These authors, I must say, they mainly concerned with the geography of the world, and they briefly talk about the Pamirs, its minerals, precious stones, and golds in golden mines in passing. And we are also short of historical sources on Wakhan up until the late 19th century European exploration of the region and its late conquests by the British and Russian empires. In the late 19th and early 20th century, numerous works, including travelogues, expedition reports, military dossiers, personal accounts, were compiled on Wakhan by European and Russian scholars, including but not limited to John Wood, Thomas Gordon, George Curzon, Ole Olufsen, Alexei Babrinskoy, Mikhail Andreev, Orl Stein, and many others. And these authors, I mean, they often rely heavily on the indigenous oral accounts. And they talk about the ethnography mostly and topography of Wakhan, while making some references to the ancient sites and the stories behind them. One of such stories is called the Qisai Qaqaha, or the story of the Qaqa, which concerns some pre-Islamic rulers of Wakhan. It should be noted that many of these legends are either cited or paraphrased in the works of the later folklorists, historians, archaeologists, and ethnographers of Badakhshan, like Iskandarov, Shakar Mamadov, Khurban Shoev, and many others. Developed over a number of centuries, you know, these stories usually espouse moral virtues and heroism involving magic episodes, events, and characters. The first written account of Qaqa's legend was discovered by the chief of the Russian Pamir post, someone called Alexander Mukhanov, during his 1908-1909 visit to Wakhan. This is a relatively small manuscript, which in addition to other stories also includes stories about Qaqaha's battle with Ali ibn Abu Talib. And it's mainly based on the oral version of the Qaqa story. The legend provides a detailed description about the ancient rulers of Wakhan, their beliefs, practices, and lifestyle. Describing these rulers as aliens, Begona, or demons, sometimes Div, it kind of polemically accuses them of being infidels, like Kafiron, or Gabrakon, like Zoroastrian, who wore black, Siapush, and practiced incestuous marriages. According to the traditional legend, Qaqaha migrated from Kabul to Wakhan with his brothers Zangibor and Zam and sisters Zulkhomor and Zulasham. It should be noted that the term Qaqaha has different, terminological application in Persian, Arabic, and Turkish languages. It does not necessarily signify a person's name, but may also refer rather to a title or designation, or even a castle. In this story, therefore, the term may generally imply to the title of the chief leader who led the invasion and later established his dynasty in Wakhan. Guys, I can't see anything. Can you hear me properly? Is there any issues?
Your slides are moving.
Slides are moving. I'm not in control of the slides. It's a short.
Prashant, give me next slide.
You tell me when is the next slide, so
I will tell you. Yeah, because that's still on the map. Yeah. Yeah, but when I go to the others, I will let you know. So otherwise, the sound, everything is fine, right?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay, thank you, guys. So the legends refer to one of the Qaqa's brother, someone called Zamr, Zamri Otash Paras, so Zamr, the fire worshipper. And also they call them Gabr. It's the Muslim designation, sometimes in a polemical way of Zoroastrian, they call them Gabr, who had his own Otashkada, or fire temple. For example, in Zong, there is the Otashkada. So if this is true, then Zamr must have lived during the Sassanid rule, when the Persians took control of Central Asia, including the kingdoms of the Pamir Plateau, first from the Kushan, and then from the Eftalites. So according to the Hudud al-Olam, which I mentioned earlier, the Persian source, 9th century Persian book of geography, the people of Wakhan and its capital town of Sakoshim, also called now Ishkashim, were Gabrakon, or the followers of Zoroastrian. Some scholars, for example, Scott, and also the Tajik scholar Shokhumorov, they even argued that Zoroastrian was the main religion in Badakhshan and Pamir principalities prior to Islam. Okay, now, although one would argue that, Zoroastrianism as a court religion could have been practiced by some rulers of Wakhan, it is hard to believe that the entire region was Zoroastrian, since elements such as incestuous marriages, fire worship, also existed in the local polytheistic beliefs and practices. Veneration of fire, for example, is an important part of the complex mix of religious practice, often referred to simplicity as shamanism, which was widely spread in Central Asia, in Wakhan and Central Asia as a whole, prior to the advent of Islam. Many elements of the pre-Islamic practices inevitably found their ways into the local Islamic culture by providing new meanings to the old rituals. It is traditionally believed that Ali and his sons, Hassan and Hussein, they defeated Qaqa and his brother. There are, of course, shrines of Ali called Shoy Mardon in Namadgut, opposite the Qaqa fortress, and the shrine of Bibi Fatima in the Vichkut, close by the Yamchun fortress. But it should be said that the traditional claim about the Wakhan campaign of Ali and his family members cannot be verified by any historical facts. Although Muslim tradition is rich in stories and legends about Ali's journey to and his miracles in Central Asia, no historical evidence has been found so far to support this argument. Having said this, however, one cannot totally root out the possibility of the later Arab troops raiding the kingdoms of Badakhshan. On the eve of the Arab invasion of Transoxiana, these kingdoms were caught in the middle of power struggle for regional hegemony between the Tibetans, the Chinese, and the Turks. The former conquered Wakhan between 661 and 663. The ruler of Takhoristan, they called Chabghu, which were of Turkish origin, formally assumed the authority over Badakhshan, Wakhan, and other districts in the north throughout, though particularly they seem to enjoy all these principalities, semi-independence even after the Arab conquest. The Arab troops under the Sahli, the brother of the famous conqueror of Central Asia, Qutayba ibn Muslim, conducted several raids to the lands across the Amud Darya in the early years of the 18th century. 8th century. During the early phases of this conquest of Transoxiana, the Arab troops conducted irregular attacks from their main base in Marv to some southern principalities of Takhoristan. In the later phases, the raids of Takhoristan continued and rapidly progressed towards the north of Badakhshan. According to the Tabari, the famous historian, Muslim historian, between the years 734 and 738, Muslim troops conducted irregular raids on the castles in Upper Takhoristan and even crossed the Panj-River in Badakhshan, which was not far from Ishkashim or Sakoshim and Namadgut fortresses. Similarly, the Korean monk Hu Chao reports that in 765, the Arabs imposed a peace treaty on the kingdom of Wakhan. Thus, one may safely assume that during their conquest of Takhoristan, Muslim troops did encounter with the local troops in the northeast province of Wakhan and Ishkashim, and that although the authenticity of Ali's battle with Qaqa is historically fallacious, similar events might have occurred in Wakhan during the Arab invasion. Now, Shoshami, could you have the next slide, please? Now, turning to the historical sites, it should be said that although very little is preserved from the ancient architecture of Wakhan, when one travels across the region from Ishkashim to Koshgar on the to Khargushi on the Tajik side, or from Ishkashim to Sarhad on the Afghan side, one can easily observe many fortification elements such as defense walls, observation towers, arrow loops, especially when it comes to the fortress of Namadgut and Yamchun. These fortresses, also known by the name of their rulers, such as Qaqa, or polemically called infidel fortresses, Kofir Kala. Yamchun is also called Gashen, meaning the city of the Sacs, and Namadgut Kuhan in Chinese sources, according to Medelsham's reading. In terms of location, as you can see from these pictures, both fortresses stand on the precipice of a plateau close to confluence or the source of rivers. A strategic choice of sites that suggests that the fortresses were built purely for defense and security purposes. As one of the largest sets of fortifications in Badakhshan, the Yamchun fortresses was built on a triangle plateau surrounded by cliffs, and beneath them, the two mountain streams, namely the Yamchun and Yazhuk, which follow into the Panj-River. The fortress of Namadgut is located on an upland hill very close to Panj-River, where the river becomes narrower, provides bridgeable crossing between Namadgut and the Afghan village of Qazide, previously known as Ishtraq. In fact, there was a bridge across the river to connect these two sides. According to Bobrinskoy, a Russian scholar, the bridge or its ruins was still visible in the early 20th century. Building fortresses in such location was popular in Central Asia and Caucasus well before the coming of the Greco-Macedonians. Analogies of the Wakhan fortresses were also discovered in the Zarafshan Valley, in the mountain of Mor, in Isfara, Asht, and Shaharistan in Surd region of modern Tajikistan, and in Tabriz in Iran, built around sometimes 5th and 6th century AD. So they represent the fusion of techniques and concepts of military architecture from inside and outside of the ancient world to create a unique style. These strongholds also were protected not only by the natural barriers, but also by clever planning. The size and shape of the mountain fortress also depended on the purpose for which they were originally designed. If you could go the next slide, please. The Namadgut fortress was fortified with thick walls, which were made of raw bricks, contrary to the stone used in the construction of a triangle-shaped fortress of Yamchun. Yet their internal design resembled each other. Both consisted of observation towers, 2 courtyards, 1 citadel, each located either in the center, like you can see in Namadgut, or upper quarters in Yamchun. There were, however, very few apartments inside the fortress. For example, Namadgut had only 3 living areas in the citadel, whereas Yamchun had some long and narrow compartments alongside the walls of the citadel. This is another indication of the fact that the fortresses were initially designed as a military strongholds. The location of citadels in both fortresses was meant to kind of complicate any potential attack on the command point. In order to conquer either the citadel, the enemy had to take the main courtyard first, which was possible only by entering through the eastern gate, defended by 2 strong towers with built-in harrow loops. Similarly, the fortresses had several observation towers across them, allowing the guards to observe the traffic of people and goods around the castle and on the road. Such observations were also built on the entrance of some mountain passages, like in the villages of Darshai, Shitkhar, Brang, Langar, and Mitz, leading to the Shokhdara and Ghun valleys in order to prevent robbers from raiding the trade routes. Of course, the robbers were local. So the architectural composition of the ruins, if you go to the next slide, please, suggests that only a powerful political dynasty could afford to build such massive strongholds in order to meet its larger strategic objectives, such as security and defense, trade and taxation. Although lack of historical evidence precludes speculation about the construction time, some archaeological artifacts and historical events point to the Kushan period, which is 50 BC and 2025 AD. During the reign of the Kanishka I emperor, the empire's policy to expand its control over the Silk Road brought the Kushan closer to their Iranian subjects in the West, whose loyalty they needed to fulfill their geopolitical ambitions. It thus stands to reason that the construction of massive strongholds across the Pamirs and Wakhan in particular was probably a part of that bigger project. In other words, Kushans built the castles and temples in order to facilitate the traffic of goods and people on the road, maintain security, collect taxes, and most importantly, promote Buddhism. Indeed, the Kushans were the great patrons, of Buddhism and responsible for its spread in Central Asia, Parthia, and China. Although the history of Kushan Empire largely remains obscure, their coinage, which depicts a variety of ancient deities and material objects, are well known throughout Eurasia. Excuse me. So these objects traveled across the continent and consequently left their marks wherever the caravans took them. Several archaeological artifacts relating to Kushan period were excavated in the ancient ruins of Wakhan. Let me think a little. So these included red ceramics, silver coins, and ancient in the ancient town garrison of Nud, which is now called Ishkashim, a few miles away from the Namadgut fortress. The Namadgut and Yamchun forces survived the collapse of the Kushan Empire and continued to function during the Eftalites, 6th century, and up until the Arab conquest. So next slide, please. So you can see, here how the arrow loops were built in both castles. In this picture, of course, you can see Namadgut. So we can go the next one, please. Now let us turn to the Wakhan route of the famous Silk Road. Several routes and tracks of this international network of roads pass through the valleys of the Pamirs and Hindukush mountains, including Wakhan, which played a significant role in the transit of goods, ideas, and places along it also benefited from the exchange. In compare with the northern routes of the Silk Road, which was crossing through Alai Valley to Sagriana, the Wakhan route, also classified as the southern route or the Buddhist passage, was the shortest and safest routes for travelers, especially for the Buddhist monks who traveled from China to India in search of original Buddhist texts. So the route was stretched from the ancient town of Sakoshim in the west to Langar or Kish in the east, where the Pamir and the Wakhan rivers merged, constituting the Panj-River. Langar, which stands for heaven, a place of rest or port, was a key stopover for the travelers in the eastern part of the route. Here, the route took two courses through eastern Pamir or Pamiri Kalon to Khoshgar, through Sarat Valley across the Wakhan-Darya to Wakhjir Pass to Khotan in China. At the western gate of the route, there was a major hostelry called Dorkish Caravansaries. Its ruins were discovered by the Soviet archaeologists in the 1970s in the Nod village of Ishkashim. The route was well equipped with numerous fortresses, caravansaries, altaries, and arrow towers, and also gates, they call darwaza or checkpoints, in order to protect the trade from the brigands. The ruins of the Wakhan Tuphonas can also be observed in the villages of Darshai, Shitkhar, Zumud, Zong, and Kasvir. The simple structure design of the Tuphonas, the Harrow Towers, which consist of a single stone-made tower, includes that they could only accommodate a few patrol troops to keep watch on the road. According to the oral tradition, the Strongholds had an inter-tower alarm system, locally known as Pamirs, meaning firing arrows. It's kind of a prototype of a modern rocket signal, which used fire at night and smoke during the daytime to alert the commandants of the fortress about suspicious movement on the road. Local memory is still fresh on how this system was activated, and they were actively used during the 19th and early 20th centuries to protect Wakhan from brigands, from both foreigners like Chinese, Afghans, and Kyrgyz, and locals like coming from Shohdara and Gund. As a part of Silk Road network, the ancient Wakhan, like other kingdoms of Badakhshan, also contributed towards the material trade and cultural exchange in the region. According to early Arabic and Persian sources, Wakhan was famous for its gold, precious stones, saddle cloths, and arrows, which were exported to other parts of Badakhshan and Central Asia. Similarly, the traffic of goods and cultures on the Wakhan route contributed towards the growth of several Asian settlements in the region, such as Sakoshim, Ren, Ramanit, Bidum, Darshai, Shitkhar, Zumud, Kutub, Frang, Zong, Dirch, Langar, Kasvir, Yumkhona, and Rechiv. where a number of artifacts of the ancient civilization have been discovered. For instance, in the ancient graveyards of Zumutk, Soviet archaeologists led by Boboev excavated several objects made of stone, wood, bone, iron, and bronze, which in addition to the basic life tools also included jewelries, musical instruments, such as reeds made of animal bones, and wooden harps from the Kushan period. With the new geographic discoveries in the 15th and 16th century, the continental trade route lost their position to the maritime routes, since the later offered cheaper means of transportation. Consequently, the Wakhan route too began to lose its importance as far as interregional trade was concerned. However, it continued to function as a regional transit route in Greater Badakhshan until the elimination of Wakhan and the Pamir principalities and emergence of new political borders in the late 19th and early 20th century. Can we go to the next slide, please, George? So now, about the Buddhism. Prior to Islam, the people of Pamir professed various forms of beliefs and practices associated with or similar to shamanism, Mechanism, Zoroastrianism, Mithraism, and Buddhism. The Buddhist ideas first traveled from India to Iranian world and then through the Silk Road to China during the Kushan period, an area when Buddhists greatly benefited from the state and was generously funded by the traders. It soon spread alongside the trade route of Central Asia with the help of monks and traders who built monasteries, cave temples, and distributed Buddhist scriptures. Our knowledge of Wakhan, of the Buddhist Wakhan, is limited to some references found in the early Chinese sources and two archaeological sites in the village of Khandut in Afghan Wakhan and Vrang in Tajik Wakhan, where the ruins of some Buddhist monasteries and cave temples are still present. The famous Chinese travel monk Huan Tsang, who returned from India to China through Wakhan in the mid-7th century, in his famous CHHU key, asserts that there were about 10 monasteries in Wakhan, which he called Tamositete. According to him, there was a congregation led by a monk in Khandut, the second capital of Wakhan kings. Although there is no reference to Buddhism in Wakhan in the reports of the Chinese travelers who traveled prior to Tsang, those who came after him do briefly mention the Khandut Viara and its attendees. For example, Hu Chao, who traveled through the Pamirs in the 8th century, says that Buddhists of Wakhan professed the Hinayan school of Buddhism. Hinayan, of course, it was not school. It was rather an abusive term deployed by followers of Mayahana, the greater vehicle, to refer to the traditional schools as the lesser vehicles to enlightenment. The Khandut Viara is also depicted in the Hudud al-Olam, which I mentioned earlier. It describes Khandut or Hamanda as the main Butkada or Butkhona of Wakhan, and the fortress on the left as the fortress of the Buddhists. The fortress of the left side, it could refer to either to Yamchun, which we talked about, or the Vrang castle in Tajik Wakhan, whereas Stupa, you can see in the picture, and the several cave temples are located. The first archaeological excavation of Vrang were undertaken in the late 1970s by Soviet scholars. According to the famous Tajik Soviet scholar Mira Bubnova, the temple was built around on the natural platform, sometimes in the 6th and 7th century AD. It consisted of some living apartments in the eastern part and 3 stair stupa in the western part, and courtyard in the middle surrounded by towers. Next slide, please, Choshambe. There are also some vaulted spaces resembling hermit caves on the right bank of the Vrang stream alongside the temple and in the nearby village of Yam, Gunukut, and Darshai, which in the later centuries served as a shelter for the locals who hid themselves from the foreigners and neighboring brigands. It is argued that monasteries combining elements of cave chambers and built premises like those in Vrang were common in mountain areas of India, in Deccan, in Iran, and in Transoxiana, especially in the eastern part in the 3rd and 4th century AD. They served as a space of worship and shelter for the merchants and monks who regularly passed through the routes of Central Asia. So now I want to just conclude. If you could go to the next slide, please, Chorshanbe. To conclude, ancient Wakhan, though geographically far from the ancient centers of civilization, did play its part in the international endeavor of trade and cultural exchanges by providing short and safe paths for merchants, preachers, and other travelers who traveled from China to Bactria and India and vice versa. At the same time, benefited from them as far as cultural and economic exchanges were concerned. The material and cultural heritage of the road is crucial to understanding of the region's ancient history and its place in the history of Central Asia as a whole. The Strongholds name managed to facilitate the traffic of people and goods on the road, collecting taxes from them and providing at the same time shelter and security for the people who traveled on the Silk Road. As far as religious and cultural exchanges on the road were concerned, some elements of Buddhist as Zoroastrian religion permitted the local polytheist beliefs and practices. The Buddhist monks built temples and meditation caves like the Vrang Stupa and the Handu temple with a Buddha statue. The advent of Islam in Transoxiana kind of barricaded the development of Zoroastrian and Buddhist ideas and practices in the region. However, many elements of these religious ideas and beliefs, they left their permanent marks on the local culture. Eventually, those elements were absorbed and became instinctive parts of the local beliefs and practices associated with spirituality and mysticism, fire and smoke, shrines and altars. Thank you very much. If any question, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Iloliev, for this very informative and interesting lecture on ancient Wakhan and the sources about the trade routes, Wakhan being as a trade route in the Silk Road, famous Silk Road. Now I would like the audience and the attendees, if any of you have any questions or comments, you could raise your hand or you can unmute your mic and speak. The floor is open now for question and discussion.
Roman Lahudinsky, I would like to mention, you mentioned the caves. I think I would ask, are these natural caves? Because to me, it looks like artificial. Did you understand?
Yeah. So, yeah, thank you for the question. Yes, as I mentioned, there are caves in many villages in Wakhan, not only Wakhan, but all around the Pamirs. But those I showed, yeah, some of them may be natural, but some of them are not. You are right. Mm-hmm. They probably were digged by, people, especially, I mean, this is not a kind of unique to Wakhan, as I was mentioning. This kind of cave temples existed in other parts of Central Asia. They were Buddhist kind of caves. And most of them were, of course, constructed. They were big, but they also, after the time of the Buddhism, when Islam came in, later on I was mentioning in the 18th and 19th century, these caves served as a shelter for people who hide themselves from the bandits, from those who raided the region, from Afghans, for example, or others. Yeah, you're right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments?
Yes, may I ask?
Yes, Elmira.
Elmira Kutumpolo from University of Central Asia. Well, thank you, Dr. Iloliev, for this very informative presentation. I learned a lot and you made very interesting points. And I would like to ask about the point that you made regarding the ancient religious belief system that was practiced in ancient Wakhan. And as you know, we commonly believe that ancient populations of this region practiced Zoroastrianism before the coming of Islam to the region. And you mentioned that that not all of the ancient rituals and beliefs are related to Zoroastrianism. So in the Turkic-speaking part of the region in Central Asia, the pre-Islamic ancient belief system is now being described as being a Tengrianstvo or Tengirchilik in local Kazakh or Kyrgyz language. So they are undermining, disregarding the existing term that was coined by scholars like shamanism. That's not the right terminology to describe the pre-Islamic ancient belief system of the Turkic-speaking Central Asia. So they are now presenting, using this term Tengrianstvo or Tengrianity to refer to the pre-Islamic belief system of the Turkic-speaking Central Asia. So in this part of the world, in the Pamirs, including the ancient Wakhan, do we have any evidences, oral or written or archaeological evidences about the use of indigenous, terminology or word that refers to God or to any other deities? Do we have any evidences?
Thank you very much. Yeah.
For example, in Turkic Central Asia, we got this term Tengir or Tengrianity from the ancient Turkic word that was found on the stone stelas, for example.
Thank you. Yeah, you are right. Yeah, as I was also mentioned in my lecture, this term shamanism, it's very simplistic and it's used by first. It does not cover everything which people of the future had professed. Of course, they did have their own system of beliefs and practices. In Wakhan, yeah, I mean, as I was saying, those elements. That's why I made the point that elements such as, let's say, the worshiping fire or marriages between the close family members and stuff. They were not unique to Zoroastrian, for example. They did exist in other local beliefs and practices, of the region, in Wakhan, elsewhere in Central Asia. So, but some scholars argued, like Shokumorov and also English scholar Scott, they were Zoroastrian, even the Kazakh was Zoroastrian, which I personally do not believe. Maybe some elements did exist, but they were not totally Zoroastrian. Like in Wakhan, I was discussing, they mostly were Buddhist in a sense, but. And also the other question is whether these Buddhists, there were about 100 Buddhist monasteries in Wakhan, according to the Chinese sources, which I mentioned, 6th, 7th century. But whether those were for the locals or were they just for the travelers who traveled through the route to China and to India, that's another question. But the fact of the matter is that, the locals, as you have mentioned, they did have their own ways of saying stuff. But unfortunately, the sources which we have, they are mostly coming from Islamic period. And that's why most of them are kind of polemical arguments. They polemically accuse, for example, the Jabr. The term Jabr itself, which refers to Zoroaster, it's
pejorative term used by the Muslims to designate, the Zoroastrians. So this, for example, in a local Wakhi or Pamiri, you have this term, Jab, who is not Muslim, who is Zoroastrian. But as far as for the deities, they call, for example, the term Khoda, like it's mostly Persian, it's not Arabic.
Dr. Iloliev, can you speak a little bit closer to the mic because your voice disappears?
Okay, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we do.
Yeah, I was saying like the term Khoda, for the term used for God, which then been now used in Islam as well, but it's not Arabic or it's a Persian, or I mean, because these people, I mean, of Wakhan, Shugnan, and others in the Badakhshan region, they were kind of Eastern Iranians. So they use those terms used in the Persian vocabulary or old Persian vocabularies. So yeah, in that sense, they were. But as I was saying, for the evidence, that most of them are from Islamic time and they are polemical arguments. And other than that, we had beliefs associated with the spirits of the dead relatives, for example. It was a kind of way of belief, which still elements of it exist in the current religious settings in Badakhshan. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, thank you. That's very good.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Yes, I have one question, Marek Morin from Poland. Are there any archaeological excavations conducted at presently at Yamchun and Namadgut?
Thank you. The extensive archaeological, as I was mentioning, excavations were during the Soviet time and by the Soviet scholars, especially by Babaev, who worked on both Yamchun and Kaka, and Namadgut and Yamchun. But as far as the modern archaeological excavations are concerned, I don't think that they've done anything substantial since the collapse of the Soviet Union. But I know that, for example, the castle of Yamchun is now included in the UNESCO's list of the cultural heritage of the world. And the locals also now are becoming more aware of, their past, of their history. And they are kind of now trying to preserve these places, because usually, especially after the collapse of the Soviet Union, these ruins also, they started to become more disintegrated and disoriented and used for different purposes. For example, the Namadgut one was used by the border patrols, they were stationed, the military border patrol there. So, but now, they're trying to kind of preserve those stuffs and to kind of, maybe at least for the touristic purposes. But for the excavations, I don't think that they are doing anything substantial at the time, as far as I'm.
Thank you very much.
No.
Yeah, thank you. Any other question or comments? We have one question in the chat. It says from Kashif Esa, what are the limits of the oldest Wakhan territory, or considered as a wide area leading to east, native, until Xinjiang, China, northern parts of Pakistan, of course, Russia, and even towards Persian Empire? My question is how you define the territorial identity of Wakhan?
Thank you. Of course, first of all, I think we have to look at it geographically and then politically. So geographically, as I was mentioning, and I gave some examples from the other scholars and who defined the geographic boundaries of Wakhan. It's a valley. It's a valley which is located between Pamir and Hindukush across the Panj-River, and also through the Wakhan-Darya, Obi Wakhan, in the Sarhad up to the border of modern Pakistan. And the little and big Pamir Pamirs, Khurd, and Kalon, they were also part of what's known Wakhan. As far as the Wakhis now living, for example, in China, in Pakistan, the northern areas of Pakistan, in Gilgit-Baltistan region, these are, of course, the migrants who migrated mainly from Wakhan to that part of the world, and also we had in the past until 1895, before that, the kingdom of Wakhan, or principality of Wakhan, which was led by their own mirs or princes, who were in a sense semi-independent. Of course, they sometimes depended on the Badakhshan, sometimes on the Koshgar, but generally they maintained their semi-independence. So even during the time of Kushan, one can argue that because the Kushan also had this indirect rule, meaning that they gave everything to the local rulers, but nominally they were part of the Kushan Empire. So the same was that. So the map of the world, especially the political map of the world, can change anytime. So as now, for example, Wakhan is divided between two countries, Tajikistan and Afghanistan. And also this term, which I don't like, Wakhan corridor, which itself is the Afghan Wakhan, which is a kind of colonial term. When they divided Wakhan between Tajikistan, then Bukhara and Afghanistan, they created this artificial corridor, which if you look at the Afghan map, it's like a tail of Afghanistan. So my point is that the maps, the both political maps of the countries, they can change over the time.
Thank you. And Dr. Sunatullah Jumboboy raised his hand. Okay, Dr. Jumboboy.
Thank you very much. If you can hear me.
Yes.
I am very glad to have this session on history of Wakhan. It was very informative and very productive. My question just about the history of Wakhan during the Sacs, or otherwise skiffs. Can you say something about the Sako-Khotanian connections between the Khotan, Sako-Khotani state and culture, civilization, and Wakhan, if we can say civilizations? Thank
you. So, yeah, I mean, the early history of the region, as I was mentioning, it's not as saying,
is that you're working now?
Documented. So the earliest sources which we have, they are mostly coming from the Chinese, who were the early explorers of the region. And then we have, with the coming of Islam, we have the Arabs and the Persians, but mainly because of these roads, the Silk Road, which was famous and in which Wakhan played a role, we do get references, as I was mentioning, some of the early sources, both Persian, Arabic, and the Chinese. As far as the Sacs are concerned, of course, all we know is this. They were a confederation of the Eurasians who lived in, and also consist of different groups as well, subgroups. You know, all of us, Eurasia, particularly in Central Asia. And the relation between the Wakhans and the Sacs, some even argue that, for example, the term Sac itself means that it's a Wakhi. In Wakhi language, Sac, it's we. So that's why some people connected that, you know, the Sacs were the ancestors of the people of Wakhan. So yeah, there are groups of people. There are different ethnic groups like Saks, Massagets, and others, who of course played a role in the formation, of course, of later people which we now know as a Wakhi. They are our far ancestors. And also the word, as I said, Wakhshu itself, Wakhan being Wakhshu, a country, a river country. It also goes up to the, let's say, the Darwaz, with the region of Wakhio. And some even argue that some people migrated from there to Wakhan. For example, Babrinskoy says that people migrated from there. Some would say that's the other way around. So my point is that, during the course of history, lots of migrations happened in Wakhan and in Pamir as well. So people were in constant movement. So that's why the mixing with other groups and stuff was also very much a strong possibility. Thank you, sir.
There is another question on the chat from Solmaz Mohajir. She says, do you see elements of earthquake safety in the indigenous architecture, structural configurations, and or building materials of the fortress in the Wakhan, similar to what exists in the Tibet Himalayan region?
Did you say something about earthquake? George, can you unmute yourself? I didn't get.
Yeah, elements of earthquake safety in the indigenous architecture. Do you see any elements like the one what exists in the Tibet Himalayan region?
I mean, as far as, let's say, Yamchun and Namadgut are concerned, we have they are mostly ruined. I mean, most of those castles are ruined, and it could be due to earthquake, or could be due to other natural or even human kind of hand that they were destroyed or they were ruined. But in compare with what you were saying, I couldn't see anything like that. I couldn't observe anything like that. I can't comment on that.
Thank you. And Ben Jariani has raised his hand. Ben, go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you very much, Charshamba. And thanks very much, Dr. Iloliev, for very interesting presentation. This is just a follow-up question on Solma's question about earthquake. So being environmental scientists, we always interested in exploring the effect of major natural hazards or, spread of disease like pandemics in each area. So I was wondering if there is any recorded version of any major impact in that region from earthquakes or major floods or very cold years. Have you faced or seen some information about those natural hazards in the region? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting question and very kind of new approach as well. Thank you for that as far as the environment is concerned. But you know that Pamir, Wakhan itself, it's very harsh climate. They've got very cold winters, and the summers, like the sun is very is very strong, and also very strong winds. For example, the wind of Wakhan is famous in Thai Badakhshan. They say Bodhi Wakhan, or the wind of Wakhan, which can also, of course, probably had an effect on the castles as well. So that the wind and the cold, yes, it was there, and there are, of course, factors in that. As far as for the natural disasters, I am not aware of, but the more recent one, which was the major one, it was in 1911 in the region of now called Sares, which is now a lake, but it used to be a village. And that village was destroyed completely over the night, and a huge lake emerged as a result of it. It's in the towards the Bartang, and so. But as far as this Wakhan is concerned, I haven't heard of any major natural disasters. So if anybody has any knowledge of it, please feel free to share. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Roman also raised his hand. Go ahead, Roman. You are muted. You are muted. Can you unmute?
Yes, it's only about the earthquake resistant construction which you can see in these areas. I saw it especially in the Kalash valleys in northern Pakistan. Earthquake resistance means you use a lot of wood in the construction of the houses. You have these similar constructions even in Germany. It's called Fachwerk, and the wood gives strength to the construction of the houses, of the walls. And if you construct the wood and connect these logs, these trees, then it's a really good stronghold against shaking. Yeah, that was my remark.
Thank you, Professor. If you look at the structure of the Pamiri house itself, it's I'm sure you've probably seen it. So it's also in that sense it makes sense when the beams, the wooden beams and pillars are there, 5 pillars, and also having this ceiling, open ceiling with shorkhona, with fungals. So it's all kind of, in a sense, made to be earthquake resistant. Yes, yeah, thank you.
We are running out of time at the moment, but Kashif Essa has raised his hand. Let Kashif go ahead.
Hello. Yes, I just wanted to add some very important factor in terms of very common difference which we see between the Wakhan and the Tibetan architecture is that when you come towards Himalayan and Karakoram ranges, it's more of stone and wood, whereas we see in this that there seems to be some rammed earth walls as well. So this also defines how the territory of Wakhan is a bit different from the rest of the surrounding, where it's more clay content in the earth. Thank you.
Dr. Iloliev, do you have any comments on that?
So yeah. In Wakhan, as I was saying, we use both, the stone and wood, and that probably was the only building construction materials which were in the region, and they used it. So yeah, that's true. So okay. As coming back to that question of earthquakes, I haven't heard of anything major one happening in Wakhan. George, have you heard anything or any? No.
No. There is another question, probably it would be the last question that we can take from Sash. He's saying, you mentioned about Khandut as a second capital of Wakhan, maybe taking into account Sakoshim as well. Then how was the governance system of Wakhan taking into consideration the ethnical diversity?
Thank you. Ethnic diversity, I don't know what exactly by that is meant, but I guess what I was, the point was I was trying to make was based on the sources like the Hudud al-Ulam, the regions of the world, which is a well-known Persian geography book written in the 10th century. And it has been translated into both English, Russian, and to English by Minorsky. So it clearly says that Sakoshim was the capital city of the Wakhan-Mirs, and they kind of were there. And also he says that, and the other important thing is that as far as the ethnicity is concerned, religion as well, they had a different mix of people. Like there were Muslims, there were Gabrakon, as I was saying, the Zoroastrians and Tibetans. So that understanding of ethnicity and culture probably was much, I guess, in that ancient time was much more progressive than we have now, limiting into some ethnic groups which are currently there. And yeah, and then Khandut. Khandut is given, as Hudud al-Ulam also mentions Khandut as the second capital city of Wakhan and the center of Buddhist Wakhan, which is also always confirmed by Chinese sources like CHHU. So this region was far wider in a sense of cultural, economic, political development rather than limiting by any ethnicities. And if we may, by ethnicity meaning the current residents of these places, that probably is not relevant to the ancient time.
All right. We have come to the end of our lecture today. I would like to thank Dr. Iloliev for the informative and very interesting lecture. And thanks to all the attendees and participants for their active participation and their comments and questions. And we will have more lectures, public lecture, online public lectures are coming, and looking forward again to see you there. Thank you very much, and thank everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.